John had been to many strange planets before, but this one was different. The sky was a deep purple, and the ground was covered in soft green grass that seemed to shimmer under the twin suns. It was an alien world, but it felt strangely peaceful. John had come to this planet on a diplomatic mission, trying to make a connection between humans and the many alien species that inhabited the galaxy. He was led to a large building made of stone and glass, where the leader of the planet, Zarok, awaited him. Zarok was an imposing figure, tall and broad, with blue skin that seemed to glow faintly. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but his voice was smooth and calm. "Welcome, human," Zarok said, his voice deep. "It is an honor to host you on our planet." John nodded, offering a polite smile. "Thank you, Zarok. I hope this visit will lead to a lasting partnership between our people." Zarok smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I believe it will. To show my goodwill, I have prepared a gift for you." John raised an eyebrow. "Gift?" He wasn't expecting that. "I appreciate your generosity, but there's no need for." Before he could finish, Zarok motioned to two of his attendants. They stepped forward, carrying a small woman between them. She was thin and frail, with long black hair that hung around her face, covering most of her features. She wore a simple, plain tunic, and her eyes were cast downward. As if she was afraid to look up, John's heart sank. He had seen slaves before, but it always made him uncomfortable. The woman had a collar around her neck, a symbol that she belonged to someone else, and the way she moved told him that she was used to being treated as property. "Here, human," Zarok said, his voice proud. "This is my gift to you, a slave girl, one of the finest from my planet. She will serve you as you see fit." John stared at the woman, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. He had read about the customs of some alien species, but this felt wrong. He looked at Zarok, trying to hide his discomfort. "I'm not sure what to say," John began, his voice low. "I didn't come here for this." Zarok's smile didn't falter. "It is our custom, human. You must accept her as a sign of respect." John felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't want to offend Zarok, but he also didn't want this woman to be treated as nothing more than an object. He glanced back at her. Noticing how she was trembling, her eyes wide with fear, "Is she willing?" John asked cautiously. Zarok's smile faltered for a moment, as if the question confused him. "Willing? She has no choice. Human. She is a gift." John's mind was spinning. He couldn't just take her. He couldn't accept a person as a gift, especially not someone who was so obviously afraid. But he also didn't want to make enemies. He had to think of something, some way to handle this without upsetting the delicate balance between the two species. "Thank you for the gift," John said, his voice firm but kind. "But I believe she deserves a choice. She's a person, not property." Zarok's expression darkened. "You question my generosity? This is how we show respect. You do not wish to accept her, I can find another way to honor you." John took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He didn't want to escalate things further, but he couldn't accept what Zarok was offering. Not like this. "I will take her," John said slowly, his heart heavy. "But I won't treat her as a slave. I will give her freedom. I won't force her to stay with me." Zarok stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand what John was saying. Then, after a pause, he nodded. "Very well. You are an interesting human. I'll let you decide how to treat your gift." John could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him as the two attendants handed the woman over. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were still lowered and her hands were clasped in front of her as if she were resigned to her fate. John wanted to do something to make her feel better, but he didn't know where to start. "Thank you," John said softly to the woman, trying to get her attention. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. There was fear in them, but also a flicker of something else, hope, perhaps. John held out his hand, trying to reassure her. "You're not a slave. You don't have to obey me." The woman didn't move at first. She just stared at his hand, unsure of what to do. John stepped closer, offering her a small smile. "I promise," he said. "You're free to choose. You don't have to serve me. You can leave whenever you want." The first time, the woman's face softened, just a little. She didn't smile, but there was a slight change in her expression, something that made John feel like he was doing the right thing. She finally placed her hand in his, and he gently pulled her toward him. "Let's get out of here," he said, glancing back at Zarek. "I'll make sure you're safe." As they left the room, John couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. He didn't know what kind of life this woman had lived, but he was determined to show her a different way where kindness, not cruelty, could define her future. John led the woman, whose name was still unknown to him, through the ship's corridors. The sounds of the ship were calming, soft hums and the occasional creak of metal. Glanced down at her, still trying to figure out the best way to make her feel comfortable. She had not said a word since he'd taken her from Zarak, her head still bowed, her feet dragging behind him like she was weighed down by some invisible force. "Do you have a name?" John asked softly, breaking the silence. She hesitated, her hands nervously pulling at the edge of her tunic. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John smiled gently. "Lyra," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name. I'm John." She didn't respond, still looking at the floor. John wasn't sure if it was because she didn't want to speak or if she just didn't trust him yet. He couldn't blame her. He had been an unknown figure in her life, someone who had given her nothing but more confusion and likely more fear. They arrived at a small room near the back of the ship. John opened the door, and the warm light inside seemed inviting, unlike the cold, sterile halls they had walked through. The room had a simple bed, a desk, and a small window that offered a view of the stars. It was nothing grand, but it was comfortable, a far cry from the harsh environment she must have been used to. "You can stay here," John said, gesturing to the room. "This is your space. You're free to use it however you want." Lyra slowly stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. She didn't seem convinced. It was clear to John that she wasn't. Used to such freedom, her entire body seemed tense, like she was expecting someone to come and drag her away at any moment. John sighed and took a step back, wanting to give her some space. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You don't owe me anything." Lyra turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since they left Zarak. There was a flicker of something in them. Perhaps hope, perhaps confusion, but certainly not the empty look of someone who had given up. She was processing, and for the first time, John saw that she was more than just a scared girl with a collar. "Why?" she asked, her voice still quiet but more confident. "Why are you doing this?" John paused, unsure how to answer. Wasn't an easy question to explain, especially when he hadn't figured it out himself. "Because everyone deserves kindness," he said simply. "I don't know what you've been through, but I don't want to be the same as the people who treated you badly." Lyra remained silent, her gaze dropping to the floor again. John could tell that she was thinking deeply about what he had said. It wasn't the answer she expected, and that made her unsure of how to respond. He took a step closer, but not too close. He didn't want to overwhelm her. "I know this might be hard to believe, but I want to help. If you need anything, just ask. You're free here." There was a long pause before Lyra spoke again. "What do you want from me?" John frowned slightly. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I'm not here to control you." Lyra's face seemed to soften at his words, though she was still very cautious. She stood in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do next. She hadn't been treated like this before. The thought of being free, of making her own choices, felt foreign to her. John noticed her discomfort and decided to change the subject. "If you want, you can explore the ship. It's pretty big, and there's a lot to see. The crew is friendly, and I'm sure they won't mind if you want to learn more about our ship." She didn't answer right away, but John could see that the idea of exploring was intriguing to her. He was sure she'd never had the chance to wander freely before. Her life had been one of strict rules and forced obedience. "I'll be here if you need me," John added, turning to leave the room. He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want to leave her alone in her confusion. He was doing what he thought was best, but he knew that change wouldn't come overnight. Before he could close the door, Lyra spoke again. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost too soft to hear. John turned back, a small smile forming on his face. "You don't need to thank me, just Take your time. There's no rush for that. He left the room, closing the door behind him. As he walked down the hallway, he couldn't help but think about how different this situation was from what he had expected. Thought he would be taking care of a slave, but now it seemed like he was helping a person find her way again. It was strange. He'd given her the freedom she never had, but in doing so, he felt more connected to her than he ever had with anyone. It wasn't pity that drove him, it was something more. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something important, something that could change both their lives. In the hours that followed, John stayed busy with his duties, but his mind kept drifting back to Lyra. He wondered how she was adjusting, what she was thinking. He couldn't help but feel protective of her, even though they had only just met. He knew that it would take time for her to trust him fully, but he hoped that, in time, she would realize that he was different from the others who had treated her as nothing more than a possession. For now, all he could do was wait and see how things would unfold. All he wanted was to show her that there was a better way to live, a way that didn't involve fear or pain, a way that was filled with kindness and choice. And maybe, just maybe, she would believe him. The days aboard the ship were calm, but for Lyra, they were filled with confusion and hesitation. Each time she walked the corridors or tried to speak with the crew, she felt as though she didn't quite belong. The ship was so different from the cold, sterile environment of the planet where she had been kept as a slave. The humans she had met were kind, but it was hard for her to believe that kindness wasn't just another way to trap her. John had kept his promise. He never forced her to do anything. He allowed her to move freely about the ship, even offered her food whenever she wanted it. But it wasn't just the food that she found strange. It was the respect he gave her, the way he didn't look at her as a possession, as everyone else had. He treated her like a person. It was hard to trust that someone could be so different from everything she had known. One morning, Lyra found herself standing outside the door to the ship's control room. She hesitated, unsure if she was allowed to enter. The crew was busy inside, operating the ship, but she had often seen John walk in without question. He was a part of this place, and she wasn't. Not yet, at least. Taking a deep breath, Lyra pushed the door open. To her surprise, no one stopped her. The crew members, including John, barely glanced up as she entered. She moved quietly to the side of the room, out of their way, and watched. John looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Hey, Lyra, you're welcome to sit with us if you want," he said, his voice warm and inviting. Lyra blinked, her heart pounding. In her chest, she had expected him to be angry for entering without permission, but instead, he was treating her as if she were just another member of the crew. She hesitated, but then nodded slowly and walked over to a chair, sitting down quietly. Crew continued working, and John went back to monitoring the ship's systems. For a moment, everything felt normal. Lyra's eyes scanned the control room, taking in the strange alien technology. She had never been allowed to learn about things like this. Her life had been about surviving, not learning. "You seem curious?" John said as he worked, glancing over at her. "I can show you how things work here if you want. It's not too complicated once you get the hang of it." Lyra looked at him, unsure of how to respond. Could she really learn all of this? She had spent most of her life serving, never learning anything for herself. It felt strange to even consider it. She began, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I could do it." John smiled gently, sensing her uncertainty. "You're smarter than you think, Lyra. I'll help you. There's no rush. We'll take it slow." His words were soft, and for the first time, Lyra believed him. She nodded, still unsure but willing to give it a try. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. John spent the next hour teaching her how to operate the ship's systems, explaining everything in simple terms. Lyra was slow to catch on, but John was patient, never pushing her too hard. He explained things over and over until she began to understand. For the first time, she felt a sense of accomplishment. "You're doing great," John said, his voice filled with encouragement. "You learn quickly. I knew you would." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never been praised for anything before, not in her old life. The words felt strange, but they also made her feel ... important. For the first time, she wasn't just a slave. She was a person, and John had made her believe that. After the lesson, Lyra walked out of the control room, her mind swirling with thoughts. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like there might be hope for her. She was still scared, still unsure of everything, but John's kindness was starting to break through the walls she had built around herself. Over the next few days, Lyra began to spend more time with the crew. She started asking questions, learning more about the ship and its systems. She didn't fully trust them yet, but she was beginning to feel more comfortable. She even found herself laughing at small jokes the crew made, something she hadn't done in years. One evening after dinner, Lyra found John sitting alone in the mess hall, staring out at the stars. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. "John," she said softly. He turned to her, smiling. "Hey, Lyra, what's up?" "Wanted to thank you," she said, sitting down across from him. "For everything. For not treating me like I'm just a slave. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you for what you've done for me." John looked at her, his expression kind. "You don't have to repay me. I'm just doing what's right. You deserve a chance to live your life however you want. I'm glad you're starting to trust me." Lyra felt something inside her shift. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had control over her own future. She didn't know what that future would look like, but it was hers to decide. "Maybe I'm starting to believe you," she said quietly. John smiled. "Good. I'm not going anywhere, Lyra. You don't have to go through this alone." Lyra nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't a victim of her past. She was more than what she had been told she was. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe it. As the days went on, Lyra continued to grow stronger. Her fear began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Was not the same person she had been when she first stepped aboard this ship. And that, more than anything, gave her hope. Lyra had been on the ship for a few weeks now, and she was beginning to feel more at home. She spent her days learning about the ship's systems with John, and even helped the crew with small tasks. She no longer felt like an outsider. The other crew members treated her like an equal. John never stopped showing her kindness, making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. But in the back of her mind, there was always a sense of unease. She knew that nothing could last forever, and she had learned to be wary of good things in her life. One evening, while walking down the corridor, Lyra overheard a conversation between two crew members. Their voices were low, but she could make out some of their words. "We single quotes V got to be ready," one of them said. "The captain says we may have company soon." Lyra paused, her heart racing. Company? She couldn't help but wonder what they meant. She had heard rumors from the crew about potential threats, but no one had told her anything directly. It was clear that they were preparing for something. But what? She felt a growing sense of worry, a knot tightening in her stomach. The world. She had come to know aboard this ship was safe and kind, but there were still dangers outside. Things she couldn't control. For the first time, she wondered if she would be safe here. The next morning, John gathered the crew for a meeting. He stood in front of them, his expression serious. "We've detected an alien warship approaching," John said, his voice calm but firm. "It's a small fleet, but they are well armed. We're not sure if they're here for a peaceful visit, or if they have other intentions." The crew listened intently, their faces tense. Lyra stood at the back of the room, her mind racing. The words alien warship sent a chill through her. She had no idea how to handle a situation like this. What if they attacked? What if they came for her, as Zarek had once done? She tried to push the thoughts out of her mind, but they lingered, like shadows that wouldn't go away. John turned toward her, noticing her worried expression. He gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll be safe here," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "We won't let anything happen to you." Lyra nodded. But inside, she wasn't so sure. She knew nothing about these alien warships or how dangerous they could be. For all she knew, the same people who had once enslaved her could be the ones coming to attack the ship. John's voice broke through her thoughts. Everyone, stay on alert. We'll keep a close watch on the approaching ship. I'll handle negotiations if they're willing to talk. If not, we'll have to prepare for battle." The crew moved quickly to their stations, and Lyra followed. John, as he headed to the control room, he worked efficiently, issuing commands and making sure everyone knew their role. Lyra watched from the sidelines, still unsure of what to do. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. She had spent her life following orders, not giving them. As the hours passed, ship scanners began to pick up more details about the approaching fleet. Lyra stayed close to John, her eyes glued to the screen as the warship grew larger in the distance. Her hands clenched at her sides, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't a normal situation. This was real. Finally, the alien fleet arrived, appearing on the screen as a collection of sleek, intimidating ships. They were massive, their dark hulls gleaming in the dim light of space. Lyra swallowed hard, her throat dry. She could feel the tension in the room. The crew members were preparing for the worst. Even as John tried to remain calm, "We'll try to contact them first," John said, his voice steady. "If they want to negotiate, we'll do it. But if they try to attack, we won't hesitate. To defend ourselves." Lyra watched as he worked the controls, his fingers moving quickly across the console. For a moment, it seemed like nothing would happen. Then, a transmission came through. A loud, crackling voice filled the room. "This is Captain Rinner of the Zarnok fleet," the voice said, rough and demanding. "You have been warned. You do not tolerate intruders in our space. Prepare to surrender, or face the consequences." John's face tightened, but he didn't hesitate. "We are not intruders. We have no intention of causing harm. We seek only peace." The alien voice laughed harshly. "Peace? You humans think you can come here and talk about peace? You will learn, in time, that peace is a luxury you can't afford. Prepare for battle." The transmission ended abruptly and the room fell silent. Lyra's heart sank as she realized that the situation was far worse than she had feared. These aliens were not interested in negotiations. They were here for a fight. John turned to the crew, his expression hardening. "Get to your stations. We're not going down without a fight. Prepare the weapons. We'll give them one chance to back off. If they don't, we'll defend ourselves." Lyra stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. She had never been in a situation like this before. The thought of fighting, of being caught in the middle of a war, terrified her. But she wasn't alone. She had John and the crew, and they had shown her kindness. They had protected her when no one else had. Now it was her turn to stand with them, no matter how scared she was. John looked at her, his gaze softening. "You'll be okay, Lyra. Stay with the crew. Keep safe. We'll handle this." Lyra nodded, her hands shaking. She didn't know if she could do anything, but she was determined to try. The fear in her chest was still there, but it was different. Now she wasn't just a slave anymore. She was part of something bigger, and she wasn't going to let that go without a fight. As the ship prepared for battle, Lyra took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Whatever happened next, she would face it with courage, just as the crew had shown her. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been handed over as a gift. She was stronger now, and she would stand with the people who had given her the chance to be free. The moments leading up to the battle felt like a strange dream. Lyra's hands were still shaking as she stood by the crew, watching John as he took command. The alien fleet had sent a clear message. They weren't here for peace. But John and the crew weren't going to back down. They had already shown Lyra that kindness could still exist, even in the cold depths of space. Now, it was time to show her that strength could exist alongside that kindness. John's calm, steady voice echoed through the ship's communication system, giving orders and reassuring the crew. He moved with confidence, directing the weapons, systems, and preparing for a fight that none of them had wanted. But Lyra could see the resolve in his eyes. He wouldn't let them go down without a fight. "We've got this." One of the crew members, Nia, said to Lyra, sensing her nervousness. "We've trained for this, and we have the best captain. He won't let anything happen to us." Lyra nodded, trying to steady her breath. Her mind raced. She had never been part of something like this. Her life had been about survival, about staying out of sight and doing what she was told. But now, She was standing alongside people who were willing to fight for their lives and for hers. The ship's alarms began to blare, signaling that the alien warships were closing in. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The massive alien ships appeared on the ship's screen, their sleek forms dark against the vastness of space. She felt the tension in the air grow thicker, the crew members moving faster now, preparing for the inevitable. John looked at Lyra one last time before turning back to the controls. "Stay with Nia. Stay safe," he said, his voice soft but firm. Lyra opened her mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded. She was scared, but she had never felt more determined. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing up, about choosing to live a life that wasn't shaped by fear and pain. The first shots from the alien fleet rang out, striking the shields of the ship with a loud, thunderous sound. Lyra flinched, her hands clenching into fists. She had never imagined that she would be in the middle of something like this, something that felt so real, so dangerous. Yet, here she was, standing tall with the crew who had shown her nothing but kindness. "They've targeted our engines," Nia called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We've got to protect them, or we're dead in the water." John's voice cut through the noise, calm and clear. "Redirect all power to shields. Turn fire, but keep the engines safe. We'll need them to get out of here." Lyra watched as the crew moved in unison, working together as one. She had never seen anything like it. It wasn't just the ships. Systems they were managing, it was their own lives, their own safety. They were fighting not only for themselves, but for each other. For her too. Lyra didn't know much about battle tactics, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. Her life had always been dictated by others, controlled by fear and manipulation. But now, she had a chance to make her own decisions. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of this crew, part of the fight. She rushed to one of the consoles, her hands trembling as she worked to assist Nia with the ship's weapon systems. She had no experience with anything like this, but the basics were easy enough to understand. She could aim and fire just like the rest of the crew. Nia glanced over at her with a look of approval. "You're a fast learner," she said. "Keep it steady, and you'll be fine." Lyra focused, locking her eyes on the screen. Of the enemy ships, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands shook, but she kept her breath steady. The first time she wasn't just trying to survive, she was fighting back. The ship shuddered again as another blast hit, but the shields held. The enemy fleet wasn't giving up, but neither were they. John's voice crackled over the comms again, his orders quick and decisive. "Keep the pressure on them. We've got them outnumbered, but we need to stay sharp." Lyra fired, sending a blast of energy toward the nearest enemy ship. The shot hit its mark, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had done something. She had made a difference. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Lyra was no longer just a scared girl on a ship. She was part of a crew, fighting for their survival, and she was starting to believe in herself. She fired every piece of equipment she helped repair, made her feel stronger. She wasn't just someone who had been given freedom. She was someone who was actively fighting for it. The enemy fleet began to retreat, their ships damaged and unable to continue the fight. John's voice came through the comms again, this time with a hint of relief. "We did it. They're retreating. The battle is over," he said. Lyra felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a sense of accomplishment. She had stood her ground. She had fought alongside the crew, and she had done her part. She wasn't the person she had been when she first arrived on the ship. She was someone else, someone who had a future, someone who could make choices. As the crew began to celebrate, Lyra felt a quiet smile tug at her lips. She had never thought she would have a chance like this. She'd always been someone else's property, a pawn in someone else's game. But now, she was her own person. John came up to her, his expression softening as he saw the change in her. "You did great, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I knew you had it in you." Lyra looked up at him, her heart full. "Thank you, John," she whispered. For everything, the first time in a long time, Lyra felt like she belonged. and for the first time, she believed that she could be more than just a survivor. She could be a fighter. She could be free. The aftermath of the battle felt surreal. The ship was still intact, though it had taken some damage. The enemy fleet had retreated, leaving John and his crew victorious. The crew members worked quickly to make repairs, but there was a sense of relief in the air. Lyra stood at the side, watching everything unfold. Her heart was still racing from the fight, but now she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. They had won. They had survived. Lyra's role in the battle had been small, but it had been enough. She had fired weapons, assisted with repairs, and worked alongside the crew as though she belonged there. She had proven to herself that she could be part of something bigger than just surviving. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced before, and it made her realize just how far she had come since arriving on the ship. John walked up to her, a proud smile on his face. "You did great, Lyra," he said, his voice warm. "I knew you had it in you." Lyra's heart swelled at his words. She hadn't expected to feel this way. I'd spent so much of her life hiding, staying out of the way, not daring to dream of being anything other than what others had made her. But now she was starting to believe that she could be more than that. "Thank you, John," she replied softly, her voice full of gratitude. "I never thought I could do something like this. I didn't think I had it in me." John nodded, his eyes. "Kind, you've come a long way, Lyra. You're not the same person you were when I first met you. You've proven that you're stronger than you know." Lyra smiled, though it was still a bit shy. "I never imagined that this would be my life," she said. "Never thought I could be free." John's expression softened, and for a moment he was silent. "You're free, Lyra. You've always been free, but now you have the chance to live the life you choose." Her heart fluttered at his words. It was hard to believe, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had been given a chance to live a different life, one where she could choose her own path, and she didn't have to do it alone. She had John and the crew who had shown her nothing but kindness and acceptance. They had believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. "I don't know what the future holds," Lyra said quietly, "but for the first time, I feel like I can actually make a choice. I don't have to follow orders anymore. I can choose my own path." John placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "That's all anyone can ask for, Lyra. You have the freedom to make your own decisions. No matter what you choose, we'll be here to support you." Lyra felt a wave of emotion rush through her. She wasn't used to this feeling like she belonged somewhere, feeling like she had the power to choose her own future. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. She could finally see a life for herself, one where she didn't have to be afraid, one where she could build something new. As the crew finished repairing the ship, the mood on board was light. They had survived, and they had proven themselves stronger than anyone could have imagined. Lyra spent the next few days helping with the repairs, working alongside the crew to get everything back to normal. It felt good to be useful, to be a part of something that mattered. But more than that, it felt good to be free. One evening, after the ship was fully repaired and the crew had settled into a more relaxed routine, John invited Lyra to sit with him on the observation deck. The stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds, and the silence was peaceful. Lyra had never been so far from home, so far from everything she had known, but now it didn't feel so scary. It felt like a new beginning. John sat beside her, looking out at the stars. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice low. "Everything's changing, and it's a lot to take in. But you've made it through the hardest part." Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the endless stars outside the window. "I never thought I'd be here," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd be free. I never thought I'd get a chance to choose." John looked at her, his expression softening. "Lord, you deserve that chance, Lyra. You've earned it." For the first time in her life, Lyra felt a sense of peace. She had been through so much, and yet she had come out on the other side. She wasn't the same person who had been handed over as a slave, who had lived in fear and uncertainty. She was someone new, someone who had the power to make her own choices, someone who could live her life on her own terms. "Thank you, Lyra," said her voice full of emotion. "For everything you've done, You've changed my life. John smiled, his eyes kind. You did it, Lyra. You're the one who changed. You just needed someone to believe in you. Lyra smiled, her heart full. I think I'm starting to believe in myself. The silence between them was comfortable, peaceful. They sat together, watching the stars outside the window, both lost in their thoughts. For the first time in a long time, Lyra felt like she had a future. It wasn't certain, but it was hers to shape. And for the first time, she knew that whatever came next, she could handle it. She was free, and that made all the difference.